The crew chief didn't even look at him. "Hey, you can't be standing there." Marcus Hayes stood at the edge of the pit lane, toolbox in one hand, resume folder in the other. The late afternoon sun cut hard across the Riverside Speedway asphalt, and the smell of burnt rubber and high-octane fuel hung thick in the air. He'd driven 4 hours for this moment. The job posting said they needed a transmission specialist. Marcus had rebuilt more gearboxes than most of these guys had seen. But the crew chief, a stocky, white man in his 50s with grease under his nails and a championship team jacket, waved him off like he was selling something. "Pit access is for team personnel only." Marcus held up the folder. "I'm here for the mechanic position. I set my application 2 weeks ago." The man glanced at the folder, then at Marcus, then back at the crew working on the number 17 car, a sleek, midnight blue machine worth more than most houses. The email confirmation on Marcus's phone screen read, "Interview scheduled, 3 p.m., pit lane office." The clock on the scoreboard read 2:47, 13 minutes. "We filled that spot yesterday," the crew chief said. Marcus felt the heat rising in his chest. The email said interviews were today, 3 o'clock. The crew chief shrugged. Must have been a miscommunication. In Marcus's back pocket, his wallet held a worn American Express Centurion card, black titanium, invitation only. And that's when everything changed. Before we go on, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories travel. Marcus stood there for a long moment, the noise of air wrenches and shouting voices swirling around him. The pit lane stretched out behind the crew chief like a canyon of chrome and carbon fiber. Tool carts lined up like soldiers. The smell of racing fuel mixed with hot brake dust. Somewhere deeper in the garage, a pneumatic lift hissed as it raised a chassis into the air. He could see the other mechanics, all of them white, most of them younger than him, glancing over their shoulders. A couple of them whispered to each other, hands cupped near their mouths. One of them, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, with a backwards cap and a tribal tattoo creeping up his neck, smirked and elbowed his buddy. Marcus had been here before. Not at this track, not with this team, but in this exact situation. The polite dismissal, the vague excuse, the phantom job that somehow got filled just before he arrived. The door closed before he even got a chance to knock. "Look, man," the crew chief said, his tone shifting to something softer now, like he was doing Marcus a favor by explaining. "We're prepping for the championship race this weekend. It's a high-pressure environment. We need guys who fit the culture, you know? Guys who can gel with the team." Fit the culture? Marcus knew exactly what that meant. He'd heard it in Charlotte, heard it in Daytona, heard it in Talladega. Different tracks, different teams, same words. He nodded slowly, his jaw tight. "I understand." "I'm sure you're qualified," the crew chief added quickly, like that made it better. "It's just timing, you know? Wrong place, wrong time." Marcus turned and walked back toward the gate, his boots scraping against the hot concrete. Behind him, someone laughed. Not loud, but loud enough. A burst of sound that cut through the hum of engines and pneumatic tools. He didn't turn around. He just kept walking, one foot in front of the other. The way his father taught him when he was 10 years old and got called a name at school. "You keep your head up, son. Don't give them the satisfaction." The security guard at the gate, a younger black man with close-cropped hair and a radio clipped to his belt, gave him a sympathetic look as Marcus approached. "Tough break, brother." "Yeah." "Are you a mechanic?" 22 years, Marcus said, stopping for a moment in the shade of the guard booth. "Started with my uncle's garage in Detroit when I was 16. Oil changes and brake pads. Worked my way up through IndyCar development teams, then stock cars. I can diagnose a transmission problem just by the sound the gears make when they mesh. I rebuilt the gearbox on a Corvette C8 in under 6 hours once, from scratch." The guard whistled low, shaking his head. "And they turned you away?" Marcus didn't answer. He just kept walking toward the parking lot, past the rows of trailers with team logos painted on the sides, past the hospitality tents where sponsors drank cold beer and laughed about quarterly earnings. But as he reached the edge of the lot, he heard a voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir?" He turned. A white woman in her early 60s, dressed in a crisp navy blazer and pressed slacks, was walking toward him with quick, purposeful steps. Her silver hair was pulled back in a low bun, and she wore small pearl earrings that caught the light. She carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need to announce itself, the kind that came from decades of making decisions and living with the consequences. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, slightly out of breath as she reached him. "I was standing with a pit lane just now. I heard what happened." Marcus nodded, but didn't say anything. He'd learned a long time ago that sometimes silence was the safest response. "Do you have a few minutes?" she asked, her blue eyes steady and clear. "I'd like to talk to you about something. It won't take long, I promise." Marcus hesitated. Every instinct told him to get in his truck and drive the 4 hours back home, back to the small apartment above the auto shop where he freelanced on weekends, back to the life that was familiar, even if it was smaller than he'd dreamed. But something in her face stopped him. Maybe it was the way she looked at him, not with pity, but with recognition, like she saw something. "All right," he said finally. "A few minutes. Have you ever seen something like this where you live? I'm curious how you'd have reacted. Let me know in the comments." Her name was Margaret Callahan, and she owned a small diner in town called Maggie's, the kind of place with red vinyl booths, a jukebox that still played Motown, and a handwritten sign in the window that said, "Best Pie in 3 counties." She'd been at the track watching her nephew race in the junior division, but she'd also been watching Marcus. They sat in her car, a dusty silver Buick parked under a cottonwood tree at the edge of the lot. The windows were down, and a warm breeze carried the distant sound of engines revving. "I saw the way you carried yourself back there," Margaret said. "The way you didn't yell or make a scene. That takes strength." Marcus shrugged, looking out the window at the speedway in the distance. "Yelling doesn't change anything." "No," Margaret agreed, "but sometimes quiet dignity does." She told him she'd grown up in Riverside, back when the speedway was just a dirt oval, and her father worked as a flagman on weekends. She'd seen the racing world change over the years, faster cars, bigger money, brighter lights, but some things, she said, stayed stubbornly the same. "I watched them turn you away," she said quietly, "and I thought about my father. He would have been ashamed to see it." Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. What he didn't know yet was that someone else had been watching too. The track photographer named David Chen had been standing 20 feet away, camera in hand, when the crew chief dismissed Marcus. David had been shooting the pre-race prep for a motorsports blog with a modest but dedicated following, around 12,000 readers who loved deep dive features about the people behind the machines. David had heard the exchange, heard the words "fit the culture." I saw the smirk from the young mechanic in the backwards cap, and he pulled out his phone and posted a quick thread on the blog's Twitter account. "Just watched a highly qualified black mechanic get turned away from a pit lane interview at Riverside Speedway. Told the job was filled yesterday, even though interviews were scheduled for today. This is 2024. Why is this still happening?" Within an hour, the post had 37 retweets. By the time Marcus and Margaret finished talking, it had 200. People were sharing it, commenting, and tagging the Speedway's official account. The word was spreading quietly but steadily, the way truth often does when it's uncomfortable, not with sirens and headlines, but with whispers and shares and people saying, "You need to see this." Marcus drove Marcus back into town, past the strip malls and gas stations, past the high school football field where kids were running drills in the fading light, past the feed store and the Dollar General, and the Baptist church with the white steeple. She pulled into the parking lot of a small office building on Main Street. The sign out front read, "Callahan Property Management." "This is me," Margaret said, turning off the engine. "Come inside for a minute. I want to show you something." Marcus followed her through the glass doors into a modest lobby with beige carpet and landscape paintings on the walls. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and Margaret led him down a hallway to a corner office with windows overlooking the town square. She unlocked the door and gestured for him to sit. The office was neat and organized. File cabinets along one wall, a mahogany desk with a computer, and a framed photo of a younger Margaret standing next to a tall man with kind eyes. "That's my late husband, Robert," she said, noticing Marcus looking at the photo. "He passed 6 years ago. Heart attack. He was only 63. "I'm sorry," Marcus said. Marcus smiled sadly. He loved racing, loved cars. He would have liked you, I think. She sat down behind the desk and folded her hands. "Here's what I'm thinking, Marcus. That team at the Speedway, they made a mistake today. A big one. But I don't think you should walk away from this track empty-handed." Marcus frowned. "What do you mean?" "How much do you know about the championship race this weekend?" "Not much. I know it's the final race of the season. Winner takes the regional title and a purse of about $150,000. "That's right," Marcus said. "And do you know who owns that number 17 car? The one they were working on when you showed up?" Marcus shook his head. "A man named Dale Garrison. He's a local businessman. He owns 3 car dealerships and a chain of tire shops. He's been sponsoring that team for 8 years, and they've never won a championship. This year, they finally have a shot. That car is fast. The driver is good. But here's the thing." She leaned forward. "Dale Garrison owes me money. A lot of it." Marcus wasn't sure where this was going. 2 years ago, Robert, my husband, loaned Dale $375,000 to keep his dealerships afloat during a rough patch. It was a personal loan, documented and notarized. Dale promised to pay it back within 18 months. That deadline passed 4 months ago, and I haven't seen a dime. I've been patient. I've sent letters. I've made calls. Dale keeps saying he needs more time. She opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder thick with papers. But here's the thing about patience, Marcus. It has limits. Marcus felt something shift in the room, like the air pressure changing before a storm. "That car," Margaret continued, her voice calm and even, "is registered in Dale's name. It's his property, which means it's an asset. And according to the loan agreement Robert had him sign, if Dale defaults on the loan, I have the legal right to claim equivalent assets to cover the debt." Marcus stared at her. "You're going to take the car?" "I'm going to offer Dale a choice," Margaret said. "He can pay me what he owes, with interest, by tomorrow morning, or I can file a claim with the county clerk and place a lien on that vehicle, effective immediately. Which means that car doesn't race this weekend. It doesn't move. It sits in impound until the debt is settled." Marcus let out a slow breath. That's gonna destroy their championship run." "Yes," Margaret said. "It is." She stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the town square where the streetlights were starting to flicker on. "I didn't plan this, Marcus. I've been trying to work with Dale for months. But when I saw what happened to you today, when I saw the way they treated you, something in me just—" She trailed off, then turned back to face him. "Robert always said you judge a person by how they treat people who can't do anything for them. That crew chief didn't see a mechanic with 22 years of experience. He saw a black man in the wrong place, and that tells me everything I need to know about the culture of that team." Marcus felt a strange mix of emotions: anger, satisfaction, and discomfort. "What do you need from me?" Margaret smiled. "Nothing yet. I just wanted you to know what's about to happen. And I wanted to make you a promise. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to that track with my lawyer. And when I'm done, I'm going to make sure you get a fair shot." That night, the Twitter thread from David Chen had grown to over 900 shares. People were commenting with their own stories: mechanics, engineers, crew members who'd faced similar treatment at tracks across the country. The Speedway's PR team had posted a vague statement about commitment to diversity and reviewing our hiring practices, but it only seemed to make people angrier. Someone had screenshotted the original job posting and noticed something. It had been reposted the same day Marcus showed up for his interview, with slightly different wording. The new version asked for "cultural fit and team chemistry" in bold letters. People noticed. And in a small apartment across town, Dale Garrison sat at his kitchen table, staring at his phone. His lawyer had just called. Margaret Callahan was coming for the car. Be honest, what would you have done at this point? Step in or stay out of it? Share your thoughts in the comments. The next morning, Marcus drove back to the speedway. He didn't know why exactly. Maybe curiosity, maybe a sense that he needed to see this through. Margaret had told him to meet her there at 9 o'clock, and he'd agreed without really thinking about it. When he pulled into the parking lot, he saw Marcus standing near the pit lane entrance with a man in a gray suit, her lawyer, presumably. They were talking quietly, folders in hand. Marcus parked and walked over. Margaret saw him and smiled. "Good morning, Marcus. This is James Whitfield, my attorney." James shook Marcus's hand firmly. "Margaret's told me about what happened yesterday. I'm sorry you had to go through that." "Appreciate it," Marcus said. "We're about to go in," Margaret said. "Dale should be here any minute. I wanted you to see this." They didn't have to wait long. A white Mercedes SUV pulled up, and Dale Garrison stepped out. A heavy-set man in his late 50s with thinning hair and a golf shirt stretched tight across his belly. He looked tired and angry. "Margaret," he said, walking toward them with heavy steps. "This is unnecessary." "Good morning, Dale," Margaret said evenly. "You know why I'm here." "I told you I'd get you the money. I just need a little more time." "You've had 2 years, Dale. The agreement was for 18 months. I've been more than patient." Dale's face reddened. "You're really going to do this? You're going to sabotage the championship over money?" "Over $375,000, Margaret corrected, plus interest, which brings it to $412,000. That's not a trivial amount, Dale, and it's not about the championship. It's about honoring your word." Dale looked at James, then at Marcus, then back at Margaret. "Who's he?" he asked, nodding toward Marcus. "This is Marcus Hayes," Margaret said. "He's a mechanic. He came here yesterday for a job interview with your team. They turned him away." Dale frowned. "I don't know anything about that." "Maybe you should," Margaret said. Before Dale could respond, the crew chief from yesterday came walking up from the pit lane, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw the group and hesitated, clearly sensing trouble. "Morning, Mr. Garrison," he said carefully. "Rick," Dale said, his voice tight. "Did we turn away a mechanic yesterday? Someone who had an interview scheduled?" Rick glanced at Marcus, and recognition flickered across his face. "Oh, yeah, that was... Look, we'd already filled the position. I told him that." "The email said interviews were today," Marcus said quietly. 3 o'clock. Rick shifted his weight. "There must have been a mix-up with the schedule." "Was there?" Margaret asked. "Or did you take one look at him and decide he wasn't a good fit?" Rick's face went red. I didn't. Look, lady, I don't know who you are, but this isn't your business." "Actually," James said, speaking for the first time, "it is. Mrs. Callahan holds a legal claim on the number 17 vehicle currently in your possession, and unless Mr. Garrison can settle his debt by end of business today, that car will be placed under lien and removed from this facility." Rick's mouth fell open. He looked at Dale. What is he talking about? Dale closed his eyes. "It's a financial thing, Rick. It's complicated." "Complicated," Rick's voice rose. "We race in 2 days. We've been prepping for 6 months. You're telling me we might not have a car?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you," Margaret said, "unless Dale can pay what he owes." A small crowd was starting to gather now. Other crew members, a few drivers, people who'd heard the raised voices and come to see what was happening. Among them was a young girl, maybe 7 years old, holding her father's hand. She was wearing a tiny racing jacket with the number 17 embroidered on the back. "Daddy," she said, tugging on his hand, "why is everyone yelling?" Her father, one of the crew members, knelt down and whispered something to her, but she kept looking at Marcus with curious wide eyes. "Mister," she said, louder now, "are you a race car driver?" Marcus smiled despite himself. "No, sweetheart, I'm a mechanic." "My daddy's a mechanic too," she said proudly. "He fixes the race cars." "That's a good job," Marcus said. The little girl frowned, looking between the adults. Why is everyone mad? Nobody answered her, but her question hung in the air like smoke, simple and devastating. Why is everyone mad? Rick took a breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Look, Mr. Hayes, if I was out of line yesterday, I apologize. It was a hectic day and we were under pressure and— Don't, Marcus said, cutting him off. Don't apologize to me because you got caught. Apologize because it was wrong. Rick opened his mouth, then closed it again. Margaret watched the exchange with a careful expression, and then she glanced at Dale. You have until 5 o'clock today, Dale. $412,000. Wire transfer to the account James will provide. If I don't see it by then, I'll file the lien, and that car doesn't move. She turned to leave, and Marcus and James followed. But as they walked away, Marcus heard the little girl ask one more question. Daddy, why didn't they give him the job? You said they needed help. Marcus spent the rest of the morning at Maggie's diner, sitting in a corner booth with a cup of coffee and a plate of eggs he barely touched. Margaret had told him to wait, that she'd call him later, but waiting felt like torture. Around noon, his phone buzzed. It was Margaret. Can you meet me at my office in an hour? She asked. There's been a development. When Marcus arrived, he found Margaret and James sitting in the conference room with another man, younger, maybe mid-30s, wearing designer jeans and a button-down shirt. He stood when Marcus entered and extended his hand. Marcus Hayes, I'm Kyle Brennan. I'm a sports agent. I represent drivers and crew members in the motorsports world. Marcus shook his hand, confused. Okay. Sit down, Margaret said, smiling in a way that made Marcus nervous. You're going to want to hear this. Kyle pulled out a tablet and set it on the table. So, here's the situation. That Twitter thread from yesterday, the one about you getting turned away from the pit lane, it blew up overnight. 23,000 shares, picked up by 3 major motorsports blogs, and featured on a segment on ESPN this morning. People are pissed. And when I say people, I mean sponsors, team owners, and the racing commission itself. Marcus felt his stomach drop. I didn't want this to become a big thing. Too late, Kyle said, but not unkindly. It's already a big thing. But here's where it gets interesting. I got a call this morning from a team out of Charlotte, Redline Racing. You heard of them? Marcus nodded. They're one of the top teams in the circuit. They've won 4 championships in the last decade. 5, actually. And they're looking for a transmission specialist. Their current guy is retiring at the end of the season. When they saw your name trending and did some digging on your background, they called me. They want to talk to you. Marcus stared at him. You're serious? Dead serious. They want you in Charlotte next week for an interview. A real one. But that's not even the best part. Kyle tapped the tablet, and a document appeared on the screen. It was a bank transfer confirmation. Sender, Dale Garrison. Recipient, Margaret Callahan. Amount, $412,000. Timestamp, 10:47 a.m. He paid, Margaret said, simply, every cent, with interest. Marcus let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. But here's the thing, Kyle continued. When Dale paid Margaret, he liquidated some assets to do it. One of those assets, the number 17 car. He sold it to cover the debt. Marcus frowned. Wait, so they don't have a car for the championship? They do now, and there was something in her voice, something mischievous and satisfied. Because I bought it. Marcus blinked. You what? I bought the car from Dale, Margaret said. $412,000, which is exactly what he owed me. He signed over the title this morning. So now, I own the number 17 championship car. Fully prepped, fully race-ready. Marcus still wasn't following. Okay, but what are you going to do with a race car? Margaret smiled. I'm going to offer it to someone who knows what to do with it. Someone who understands what it takes to build something from the ground up. Someone who was told he didn't fit the culture. The words landed slowly, like dominoes falling one by one. You're offering it to me? Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. Not exactly, Margaret said. I'm offering you a choice. You can take the interview with Redline Racing in Charlotte. It's a great opportunity, and I think you'd be amazing. Or, she slid a folder across the table, you can take ownership of this car, find your own crew, and race it yourself this weekend. I'll sign over the title today. It's yours, free and clear. Marcus opened the folder. Inside was the vehicle title, transferred to his name, and a handwritten note on Maggie's diner stationery. Sometimes the best revenge is proving them wrong. He looked up at her, his eyes burning. Why would you do this? Because Robert would have wanted me to, she said simply, and because I'm tired of watching good people get pushed aside for bad reasons. She leaned forward. You have the skills, Marcus. You have the experience. And now you have the car. The only question is, what are you going to do with it? Marcus looked down at the title again, his name, in black ink. The room was silent for a long moment. I can't drive it myself, Marcus said finally. I'm a mechanic, not a driver. So find a driver, Kyle said. I know a dozen talented drivers who'd kill for a shot at a championship-ready car. We can have someone here by tomorrow morning. Marcus ran his hand over his face. This was insane. This was impossible. His phone buzzed. It was a text from David Chen, the photographer from yesterday. Heard what happened. If you race that car, I'm covering it. This story deserves an ending. Marcus looked at Margaret, then at Kyle, then at James. If I do this, he said slowly, I want to hire my own crew, people I trust, people who actually want to be there. Done, Margaret said. And I want that crew chief, Rick, to watch from the sidelines. I want him to see what he turned away. Margaret's smile widened. I'll make sure he has a front row seat. Marcus took a deep breath, and then he laughed, a sound somewhere between disbelief and joy. Okay, let's do it. Kyle clapped him on the shoulder. Welcome to the circus. Word spread fast. By that evening, every motorsports outlet in the region was running the story. Rejected mechanic becomes championship car owner after viral incident. The ESPN segment was picked up by Good Morning America. The Speedway's phones were ringing off the hook, sponsors demanding answers, fans demanding accountability, and the Racing Commission demanding a full review of hiring practices under Section 4.7 of the National Motorsports Equity Guidelines, which explicitly prohibits discrimination based on race in all sanctioned events and team operations. Dale Garrison released a statement through his lawyer, saying he deeply regretted any misunderstandings and was committed to fostering an inclusive environment. The statement was widely mocked online. One Twitter user replied, "Misunderstandings don't cost $412,000. Rick, the crew chief, was placed on administrative leave pending an internal investigation. The team's lead sponsor, a national tire company, issued its own statement saying they were reviewing their partnership with any team that didn't uphold their values of fairness and respect. 3 other sponsors followed suit within hours. Meanwhile, Marcus got to work. Kyle connected him with a driver named Jenna Ortiz, a 31-year-old Latina woman from Arizona who'd been racing in smaller circuits for years, waiting for her big break. She had 17 wins under her belt and a reputation for aggressive, fearless driving. When Kyle called her about the opportunity, she didn't hesitate. I'm in, she said. When do we start? Marcus also reached out to 2 mechanics he'd worked with years ago in Detroit, Leon Carter, a suspension specialist, and Tom Yamaguchi, an engine tuner who could coax an extra 50 horsepower out of a block just by listening to it. Both of them dropped everything and drove through the night to Riverside. By Friday morning, they were in the Speedway garage prepping the car. The number 17 had been repainted overnight. Now it was a deep metallic bronze with Marcus's initials, MH, stenciled on the hood in gold. Across the rear panel, in clean white letters, it said, Culture Fit. Margaret showed up around 10 with coffee and donuts for the crew. She stood watching them work, her arms folded, a satisfied smile on her face. You know, she said to Marcus, Robert always said the best way to change a system is to beat it at its own game. Marcus wiped his hands on a rag and looked at the car, his car. Let's hope we can. The practice runs went well. Jenna was fast, precise, and fearless. She took the turns tight and pushed the straightaways hard, clocking times that put her in the top 5. By Friday night, the buzz around the garage was impossible to ignore. Other teams were watching, sponsors were asking questions, and the crowd that showed up for Saturday's qualifying rounds was the biggest Riverside had seen in 5 years. David Chen was there too, camera in hand, documenting every moment. His blog post from that morning had gotten 47,000 views. The headline read, "From Rejection to Redemption, How One Mechanic Took Back His Power." Rick, the former crew chief, was also there, standing near the fence, arms crossed, watching the bronze number 17 car scream around the track. His face was unreadable, but his presence was noted by everyone. During a break between qualifying heats, a reporter from a regional sports network approached Marcus. "Mr. Hayes, how does it feel to be here after everything that happened?" Marcus thought for a moment. "It feels like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Do you have anything to say to the people who turned you away?" Marcus glanced toward the fence where Rick was standing. "I hope they learned something." The reporter smiled. "What about the race tomorrow? Are you confident?" "I'm confident in my driver, my crew, and this machine," Marcus said. "We'll let the track do the talking." That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his hotel room staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision, every adjustment, every calibration. At 2 a.m, he got up and drove back to the speedway. The garage was dark and quiet, but the security guard, the same one from earlier in the week, let him in. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" the guard said. "Something like that." Marcus walked through the garage, past the rows of silent cars, until he reached the number 17. He ran his hand along the hood, feeling the cool metal under his palm. This was it. Tomorrow, everything would be decided. He heard footsteps behind him and turned. Margaret was there, wrapped in a cardigan, her silver hair loose around her shoulders. "I thought I might find you here," she said. "Couldn't stay away," Marcus admitted. Margaret came and stood beside him, looking at the car. "You know, when Robert died, I thought the best part of my life was over. I thought I'd just fade into the background, manage properties, run the diner, watch my nephew race on weekends. Small life. Safe life." She turned to look at Marcus. "But then I met you, and I realized something. It's never too late to stand up. It's never too late to fight for what's right, even if you're 64 years old and you've already buried the love of your life." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Thank you, Margaret, for everything." She patted his arm. "You earned this, Marcus. Now, go win it." If you were in Marcus's position right now, hours before the biggest race of your life, after everything that happened, would you forgive and move on, or make them feel it? Be honest. Let me know in the comments. Race day arrived with clear skies and a light wind. The grandstands filled early, packed with fans who'd come for the championship, but stayed for the story. The bronze number 17 car sat in the pit lane, gleaming under the morning sun. The pre-race briefing was tense. The Racing Commission had sent 2 officials to observe, standard procedure for championship races, but everyone knew they were also there because of the controversy. One of them, a stern woman named Patricia Hollis, read a statement before the drivers took the grid. "The National Motorsports Commission takes allegations of discrimination seriously," she said, her voice echoing through the garage. "Pursuant to Section 4.7 of our equity guidelines, all teams participating in sanctioned events must demonstrate compliance with fair hiring practices. Any team found in violation will face penalties ranging from fines up to $50,000 to suspension from future events. We are currently conducting a full investigation into the incident that occurred earlier this week." The garage was silent. A few crew members shifted uncomfortably. Patricia continued. "Additionally, we are implementing mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all crew chiefs and team managers, to be completed within 90 days. Failure to comply will result in loss of sanctioning." Rick stood near the back, his face pale. He had been officially suspended from crew chief duties pending the investigation's outcome. Word around the garage was that 3 sponsors had already pulled their support from Dale Garrison's team, costing them an estimated $220,000 in lost revenue for the season. But Marcus wasn't focused on any of that. He was focused on the race. Jenna climbed into the car, her helmet visor down, her gloved hands gripping the wheel. Marcus leaned in through the window. "Remember what we talked about," he said. "Turns 3 and 7 are where you'll make up time. Don't force it in the pack. Let the car do the work." Jenna nodded. "I got this, Marcus." "I know you do." Leon and Tom made the final checks: tire pressure, fluid levels, belts, and hoses. Everything was perfect. The cars rolled onto the track. 43 machines, millions of dollars of engineering, and one championship on the line. The green flag dropped. The roar of engines was deafening. Jenna shot forward, threading through the pack with surgical precision. By lap 10, she was in 8th place. By lap 30, she was 5th. Marcus stood in the pit box, stopwatch in hand, headset pressed to his ear. He could hear Jenna's breathing through the radio, steady and focused. "Talk to me," he said. "Car feels good," Jenna replied, her voice vibrating with speed. "Handling's tight. I can push harder." "Not yet. Save it for the end. You've got 60 laps to go." The race unfolded like a chess match. Jenna moved up on lap 45, overtaking a veteran driver on the inside of turn 6. The crowd erupted. By lap 60, she was in 3rd place, tucked behind 2 championship contenders who'd been racing these tracks for a decade. Marcus watched the lap times. The leaders were fast, but they were burning fuel and tires. Jenna was patient, consistent, waiting. Lap 75. Jenna made her move. She dove low coming out of turn 4, slipping past the 2nd-place car on the inside. The 2 machines ran side by side for 3 corners, neither giving an inch, before Jenna's superior exit speed carried her through. 2nd place. The crowd was on its feet. Margaret stood in the pit box next to Marcus, her hands clasped together, her eyes locked on the bronze car. 15 laps to go. Jenna closed the gap to the leader, a driver named Brett Connors, a 3-time regional champion known for aggressive blocking. He wasn't going to make this easy. "He's going to squeeze you," Marcus warned over the radio. "Don't get frustrated. Wait for the mistake." Jenna didn't respond. She didn't need to. She was in the zone. Lap 85. Jenna pulled alongside Brett going into turn 1. Brett moved down to block. Jenna backed off, tucked in behind him, waited. Lap 87. Brett went wide on turn 3. Just a fraction, just a moment of lost grip. Jenna saw it. She cut inside, her front bumper pulling even with Brett's door. They screamed down the back straightaway, inches apart, both cars shaking with speed. Into turn 7, Jenna held the inside line. Brett tried to shut the door, but it was too late. Jenna cleared him by half a car length and pulled ahead. The crowd exploded, horns blared. Marcus felt his heart hammering in his chest. "Clear," he shouted into the radio. "You're clear. Bring it home." Jenna crossed the finish line 3 car lengths ahead of Brett Connors. The bronze number 17 had won the championship. The garage erupted. Leon and Tom jumped the pit wall and sprinted toward the victory lane. Margaret was crying, her hands over her mouth. David Chen was shooting photos so fast his camera sounded like a machine gun. Marcus walked slowly toward the track, his legs feeling strange and light, like he was floating. This was real. This had actually happened. Jenna climbed out of the car in victory lane, pulled off her helmet, and screamed, pure, unfiltered joy. When she saw Marcus, she ran to him and threw her arms around his neck. "We did it!" she shouted. "We did it!" Marcus held her, unable to speak, unable to do anything but hold on. The trophy presentation happened under bright lights with cameras flashing. Jenna hoisted the championship trophy, a gleaming silver cup worth $150,000 in prize money. But when the track announcer asked her to say a few words, she handed the microphone to Marcus. "This isn't my story to tell," she said simply. Marcus took the microphone, his hand shaking slightly. He looked out at the crowd, at Margaret standing with tears running down her face, at Leon and Tom covered in champagne and grease, at David Chen with his camera raised. And then he saw Rick, still standing by the fence, alone. Marcus took a breath. A week ago, I came to this track looking for a job. I was told I didn't fit the culture. I was told there was no place for me here. His voice was steady, calm. Today, I stand here as the owner of the championship car. Not because I wanted revenge, not because I wanted to prove anyone wrong, but because someone believed in me when it mattered most. He turned to Margaret. Mrs. Callahan gave me a chance. She gave me a choice. And she reminded me that dignity isn't something someone can take from you, it's something you carry yourself. The crowd applauded. Some people stood. Marcus looked back at the microphone. To everyone watching who's been told you don't belong, who's been turned away, who's been judged before you even got a chance to show what you can do, this is for you. Don't wait for permission. Don't wait for the system to fix itself. Build something so undeniable they can't ignore it. He handed the microphone back, and the crowd roared. Later, after the champagne had been sprayed, and the photos had been taken, and the reporters had filed their stories, Marcus found Rick standing alone near the now empty pit lane. Rick looked up as Marcus approached. His face was drawn, tired. "Congratulations," he said quietly. Marcus nodded. "Thank you." Rick started, then stopped. He looked down at his boots. Rick started, then stopped. He looked down at his boots. "I was wrong. About you, about everything." Marcus didn't say anything. He just waited. "I told myself it was about qualifications, about timing, about fit, but that was bullshit. The truth is, I looked at you and made assumptions. I saw what I expected to see instead of who you actually were." He finally looked up, his eyes red. "I cost myself a championship by being a coward, and I cost you something you shouldn't have had to fight for in the first place." Marcus stood there for a long moment, letting the words settle. Then he extended his hand. "I accept your apology." Rick shook it, his grip firm but brief. "For what it's worth, you built something incredible this week. That car, that team, it was perfect." "It was," Marcus agreed. "And if you're serious about learning from this, about doing better, then prove it. Not to me, to the next person who walks through that gate looking for a fair shot." Rick nodded, his jaw tight. Marcus turned to leave, then stopped. "By the way, I'm hiring. My team's expanding. If you want to submit an application, do it properly. Include your qualifications, your experience, and a reference. We'll review it like we review everyone else's." He walked away, leaving Rick standing in the empty pit lane. What lesson hits you the hardest in this story? Comment your thoughts. I read everyone. The sun was setting over Riverside Speedway, painting the grandstands in shades of orange and gold. Marcus sat alone on the hood of the bronze number 17 car, the championship trophy beside him, watching the light change. He thought about his father, who'd taught him to change oil in a gravel driveway in Detroit when he was 8 years old. He thought about his uncle's garage, where he'd learned that every machine has a language if you're patient enough to listen. He thought about all the doors that had closed, all the times he'd been told he wasn't quite right for the position, all the versions of, "We're looking for someone who fits the culture." The thing about injustice, Marcus realized, was that it relied on silence. It relied on people like him walking away quietly, disappearing into the background, accepting the narrative that maybe they just weren't good enough. It relied on shame being stronger than anger, resignation being easier than resistance. But Margaret had shown him something different. She'd shown him that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear. Refuse to accept the story they're trying to tell about you. Refuse to let someone else define your worth. The championship wasn't about beating Rick or Dale or any individual person. It was about reclaiming something larger, the right to be seen as he actually was, not as someone's assumption. Margaret appeared from the garage, walking slowly across the track. She climbed up and sat beside him on the hood, both of them watching the sunset in comfortable silence. "You know what Robert used to say?" she asked after a while. "He said the measure of a person isn't what they do when everyone's watching. It's what they do when they could get away with doing nothing." Marcus smiled. "He sounds like he was a good man." He was. But he also made mistakes. We both did. We lived through times when it was easier to look away, to mind your own business, to tell yourself it wasn't your problem. She looked at Marcus. "I'm grateful I got a chance to do something that mattered before my time is up." "You did more than something," Marcus said. "You changed everything." Margaret shook her head. "No, I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and built something extraordinary." They sat together as the stars began to appear, faint pinpricks of light in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear the sounds of the garage closing down for the night, metal doors sliding shut, engines cooling, voices calling good night. "What's next for you?" Marcus asked. Marcus thought about it. "Redline Racing still wants to meet with me. Kyle thinks I should take the interview, see what they're offering. But honestly," he patted the hood of the car, "I think I want to build my own team, do this on my own terms." "You've got the prize money to start with," Margaret noted. $150,000 goes a long way if you're smart about it. "And I've got you," Marcus added, "if you're interested in being a partner, silent or otherwise." Margaret laughed. "At my age? I was planning to retire and just eat pie all day." "Best pie in 3 counties, I heard." "Damn right." She looked at him seriously. "But if you're asking, then yes, I'm in. I'd be honored." They shook hands there on the hood of the championship car as the last light faded from the sky. Marcus thought about the small moment that had started all this. A crew chief waving him away from a pit lane, a casual dismissal that probably happened 100 times a day in 100 different ways across the country. How many people walked away from moments like that and never came back? How many doors closed and stayed closed? But this time, something different had happened. This time, someone had been watching. Someone had cared enough to step in, to take a risk, to say, "Not on my watch." And that, Marcus realized, was the real lesson. Change doesn't happen because systems suddenly decide to be fair. It happens because individuals choose to act when they could have just as easily walked away. It happens because someone decides that silence is more expensive than speaking up, that comfort is less valuable than doing what's right. The championship trophy gleamed beside him, reflecting the first stars. It was beautiful and heavy and real. But the thing Marcus would remember most wasn't the trophy or the race or even the victory. It was the moment Margaret looked at him in that parking lot and saw something worth fighting for. That was the gift. The rest was just proof. The following Monday, Marcus drove back to Riverside one last time before heading home. The speedway was quiet now, the grandstands empty, the track swept clean. It looked different in the daylight, without the crowds and noise and tension, just a ribbon of asphalt and some dreams. He stopped by Maggie's diner first. Margaret was behind the counter, pouring coffee for a couple of regulars. She saw him and smiled. "There he is, the champion." Marcus slid onto a stool. "Just wanted to say goodbye before I head out, and to get a slice of that pie everyone keeps talking about." Margaret cut him a generous slice of apple pie, still warm from the oven. On the house, champions eat free. They talked for a while about logistics, lawyer meetings, sponsorship possibilities, the basics of building a racing team from scratch. Margaret had already been making calls, talking to people she knew in the business. She handed Marcus a folder with contact information for fabricators, transporters, and a warehouse space available for lease on the edge of town. "If you're serious about staying in Riverside," she said, "I think we can make this work." Marcus looked at the folder, then at Margaret. "Why Riverside? I could base the team anywhere." "Because this is where it started," Margaret said simply. This is where the story began, and I think there's something powerful about staying and building something here, showing people that change doesn't have to come from somewhere else. It can happen right where you are. Marcus nodded slowly. She was right. Running away would have been easy. Staying was the harder choice, the braver choice. Before he left, he drove past the speedway one more time. He saw workers repainting the pit lane, updating signage, making changes. One of the new signs read, Riverside Speedway, where talent meets opportunity. It was small, maybe even performative, but it was something. As Marcus pulled out of the parking lot, he noticed Rick standing near the garage entrance. Their eyes met briefly. Rick nodded, not friendly, not warm, but acknowledging. Marcus nodded back. Some bridges don't need to be rebuilt. Some people you just leave in the rearview mirror. His phone buzzed as he merged onto the highway. It was a text from Jenna. Found a great crew for next season. When do we start? Marcus smiled and texted back. Soon. Real soon. The road stretched out ahead of him, straight and clear. In his rearview mirror, Riverside grew smaller, the speedway's lights fading into the landscape. But he'd be back. This was just the beginning. As he drove, he thought about all the mechanics like him, all the qualified people who'd been turned away for reasons that had nothing to do with skill or experience. He thought about the crew chiefs who'd made snap judgments, the managers who decided someone didn't fit before even giving them a chance. And he thought about how one woman's decision to stand up, one person's refusal to accept injustice had changed everything. The highway signs flew past. Detroit was 8 hours north. But Marcus wasn't going home to stay. He was going to pack up his apartment, settle his affairs, and move to Riverside permanently. He had a team to build, a legacy to create, a point to prove. Not to Rick, or Dale, or anyone who doubted him. To himself, and to everyone who'd ever been told they didn't belong. The afternoon sun warmed the dashboard. Marcus turned on the radio and found a station playing old Motown, the same music that used to play in Margaret's diner, in his uncle's garage, in the soundtrack of his life. He drove on, the championship trophy secure in the passenger seat beside him, heading toward whatever came next. 6 months later, the warehouse on the edge of Riverside had been transformed. What was once a dusty storage facility was now Hayes Racing Headquarters, a state-of-the-art garage with hydraulic lifts, diagnostic computers, a small office suite, and 3 gleaming race cars in various stages of preparation. The bronze number 17 still had pride of place, now joined by a silver number 8 and a black number 22. Jenna Ortiz was signed as the lead driver, with 2 promising rookies, one from Alabama, one from California, filling out the roster. The team employed 12 people full-time. Leon was head of suspension. Tom ran the engine program. And Rick, yes, Rick, worked as an assistant mechanic on a probationary contract. He'd applied properly, submitted 3 references, and interviewed like everyone else. Marcus had hired him, but not out of charity. Rick had skills, and skills mattered more than grudges. "How's he doing?" Margaret asked one afternoon, standing in the garage bay and watching Rick calibrate a carburetor. "Good," Marcus said honestly. "He keeps his head down, does the work, doesn't make excuses. I think he's actually learning something." Margaret smiled. Sometimes people need to lose everything to figure out what matters. The numbers backed up the success. Hayes Racing had competed in 8 events over the spring and summer season, finishing in the top 5 in 7 of them. Sponsorship revenue for the first year totaled $390,000, split between a regional tire company, a tool manufacturer, and a tech startup that wanted to be associated with the team's story. The team's social media following had grown to 112,000 across platforms, with engagement rates that sponsors loved. But more importantly, applications had poured in from mechanics, engineers, and drivers across the country, people from backgrounds that didn't usually get shots at top-tier teams. Marcus reviewed every single application personally. He'd hired based on merit, but he'd also made sure his garage looked like America. Black, white, Latino, Asian, men, women, different accents and different stories, all working toward the same goal. The Racing Commission's investigation had concluded in April. Their 38-page report cited violations of Section 4.7 and Section 11.2, hostile work environment provisions, related to the incident at Riverside Speedway. Dale Garrison's team was fined $42,000 and placed on probationary status for 2 years. Rick's crew chief certification was suspended for 18 months, though he was allowed to work under supervision. 3 other teams across the region were flagged for similar complaints and subjected to mandatory audits. The commission implemented new requirements. All sanctioned teams had to complete annual diversity training, 8 hours minimum, submit hiring data for review, and establish formal grievance procedures. It wasn't perfect, but it was measurable change. David Chen's blog coverage of the story had been picked up by a major sports network, and he now covered Hayes Racing exclusively, embedding with the team during race weekends. His documentary-style videos regularly hit 500,000 views. One piece, titled From the Pit Lane to the Winner's Circle, had been nominated for a regional journalism award. Margaret had invested another $200,000 in the team, becoming a 50-50 partner with Marcus. The diner still operated, but she'd handed day-to-day management to her niece so she could focus on racing. Robert would have loved this, she said often, and she meant it. On a warm October afternoon, Marcus stood outside the garage as the sun set over Riverside. The championship season was over. Hayes Racing had finished 3rd overall, an extraordinary result for a first-year team. But next year looked even better. They had funding, they had talent, they had momentum. A car pulled up, and Jenna stepped out holding a folder. "Got the schedule for next season," she said, handing it to Marcus. 14 races, 2 of them are national events. We're moving up. Marcus flipped through the schedule, seeing the names of tracks he'd dreamed about as a kid. Daytona, Indianapolis, Charlotte. "We're ready," he said. Jenna grinned. "Damn right we are." Inside the garage, the crew was cleaning up, putting tools away, laughing about something Leon had said. The number 17 car sat under bright lights, its bronze paint gleaming, the words "Culture Fit" still visible on the rear panel. Marcus had thought about removing those words, about painting over them and moving on. But he decided to keep them. Not as a reminder of anger or bitterness, but as a reminder of what happened when you refuse to accept someone else's limitations. Every time that car rolled onto a track, people saw those words, and they remembered. The speedway lights clicked on in the distance, preparing for an evening event. Somewhere in America, another kid who loved cars was being told they didn't belong, that they didn't fit, that maybe they should try something else. But maybe, just maybe, they'd hear about Marcus Hayes, about a mechanic who got turned away and came back to buy the championship car, about a team built on merit and grit and the simple belief that everyone deserves a fair shot. And maybe that would be enough to make them keep trying. Marcus walked back into the garage, closing the door behind him. Tomorrow there'd be more work to do, cars to prep, sponsors to call, problems to solve. But tonight he'd built something that mattered. And that was enough. Before we close, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation like Marcus's, where you knew you were qualified, knew you deserved the opportunity, but someone looked at you and decided you weren't the right fit before you even got a chance to prove yourself? Or maybe you've witnessed it happening to someone else. Maybe you stood by and watched, or maybe you spoke up. Maybe you've been the person who made assumptions, who judged too quickly, who let bias creep into decisions you thought were objective. These moments happen every day, in every industry, in every corner of this country. They happen at job interviews and college admissions and bank loan offices and traffic stops. They happen in boardrooms and classrooms and restaurants and airports. And most of the time, they happen quietly. The person walks away. The door closes, life moves on. But every once in a while, something different happens. Someone refuses to accept the story. Someone steps in. Someone says, "Not on my watch," and everything changes. That's what this story is really about. Not revenge, not even justice exactly. It's about the moment when someone decides that comfort is less important than doing what's right. It's about the power of one person believing in another person when it matters most. So here's what I want to know. What moment from this story hit you the hardest? Was it Marcus being turned away at the pit lane? Was it Margaret stepping up with the loan documents? Was it the little girl asking why everyone was mad? Was it the championship race? Or the moment Marcus offered Rick a chance to apply for his team? Drop a comment and let me know. I read every single one, and your perspective matters. And while you're here, where are you watching from? I love seeing how far these stories reach. Whether you're in Detroit or Phoenix or Portland or somewhere halfway around the world, comment your city. Our community spans continents, and that's something worth celebrating. If these stories move you, if they make you think, if they remind you that change is possible even when it seems impossible, consider subscribing. This is what we do here. We tell real stories about empathy, accountability, and the power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Because the more people who see stories like this, the harder it becomes for moments like Marcus's rejection to happen in silence. Thanks for being here. Thanks for listening. Thanks for caring about these stories as much as I do. I'll see you in the next one.